Oh, we're live. Hi, Brendan. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
Hey, thanks for having me.
To start off the show, I would love to give a quick shout out to our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Verivend. If you're a GPRLP looking to simplify the capital raising and deployment process, Verivend is here to help. Trusted by over 800 funds and managing more than $2 billion in transactions, Verivend offers a secure, streamlined payment platform designed specifically for private capital markets. Say goodbye to manual reconciliation and repeated follow-ups. Raise and deploy capital faster and with greater transparency. Ready to make your fund operation smoother? Visit Verivine.com and see how easy it can be. Okay, so to start with the show, I would love for the audience to get to know you a little bit more. So you were the second employee at AngelList, and you revealed like over 8,000 pitches before you work at Greylock, and then, now you're a partner at Rackhouse Ventures. Why don't we start with like what were some core lessons that you've learned early on in your career, kind of like you kind of carry into your job today?
Yeah, maybe I'll pick a couple. I mean, even before AngelList, I was studying at Oxford, and
Mhm.
instead of doing a consulting project like most folks who are finishing their degrees, I decided to study some more and do a dissertation. And that dissertation was on the emerging seed stage of venture capital in 2009.
Mhm.
So really, really early. Um,
OG.
yeah, there was something like 150 seed deals that year. Almost
Yeah.
wasn't even a term. Now there are, of course, thousands or tens of thousands. That gave me some pretty big conviction that this was a very promising and important new stage that was developing in venture capital. And of course, we saw that with the early seed funds happening, like first round capital and 500 startups and stuff like that. But I think more directly, some lessons and people that were really influential early on. I mean, AngelList was a formative experience. I sort of landed there the second employee. First day we had an office. It was an interesting room to land in. There was Nivi and Naval, the two co-founders, but also Brandon, who went on to be one of the co-founders of Instacart, and me. And so all of us sort of jam-packed in a room, and we hit product market fit about 3 weeks after I joined. It started, the curve started going up very, very quickly. And all of a sudden we were flooded with deals. And I was the one that managed the front door. I think, and working with sort of Nivi and Naval, 50 to 200 pitches a day was exhausting. And then connecting them with 3 or 4 thousand investors on the other side who are sort of banging on the door to get into the platform. It was a phenomenal learning experience. Really, there's this study that I love where they had a class. This is a bit of a tangent, but bear with me. Where they had a class, and I think it was pottery, and to half the class they said, "We want you to spend a week making the best piece you possibly can. You're going to be graded on the quality of the piece." And to the other half of the class, they said, "Don't worry about quality, just make as many as you can. You're going to be
Mhm.
graded on the quantity." And of course, at the end of the study, at the end of the week, the folks who had done many, many, many versions without worrying about quality actually produced the best quality. So to
Mhm.
me, this was the AngelList experience, just seeing thousands and thousands of startups. So that was phenomenal. A couple other big lessons from them. Uh, Watching Naval at work was really interesting. Naval is the best example I know of somebody who's at the same time an insider and an outsider. So
Mhm.
he understood the mechanics of venture capital really well, but he also knew what needed to change or what could change. And I think hybrid insiders outsiders are those who change some of the most interesting, um, some of the most entrenched industries in interesting ways. And
Mhm.
then finally, one more thing I learned from them, and Nivi in particular, is just communication. We would obsess over where a period goes,
Mhm.
in an email, and just the importance of honing that communication and removing unnecessary words was super
Mhm.
critical. Another example, I ended up at Greylock for 4 years after AngelList,
Mhm.
basically trying to help Greylock be a great firm for many more years. When I
Mhm.
arrived, uh, they had in that year Facebook, LinkedIn, Palo Alto Networks, Workday, and Pandora all go public. Just an amazing place.
Mhm.
But I got to watch a lot of the best investors of that generation in action up close. And something that both David Z and Reed do really well, which was formative to me, is not ask 15 questions about a company that they were considering investing in. They were phenomenal at really thinking about and having a strong opinion on what the two or three most important questions about a given company were, and pulling the conversation there versus being exhaustive. And that's something I've always tried to emulate.
I think that's really interesting. So, like, what would be the 2 to 3 question you feel like they care about the most?
Team is typically one of them, but then you have to think about team much more specifically. So is this Greylock was a special place where they were complete talent snobs. So is this
Mhm,
person one of the one, two, or three best at what they do in the world is a big thing. This was in the era of social networks, and so we also invested
mhm,
in Instagram while I was there. We were investors for a whole 2.5 days, but well, we doubled our money.
mhm.
But very much what were the mechanics that were powering that growth and how durable were those mechanics was something that we looked at very, very closely when we ended up doing Instagrams, I think Series B round. So those are a couple examples that were of that time.
For sure. I wonder, so like I guess since you have like taught so many people about pitching, why don't we start with like, I guess like first of all, like yesterday literally I was like coaching someone on like pitching. So I think all the pitches are like so perfected lately. So like I think you mentioned that it's like you should make a whole bread instead of like just like having the pieces, like just having like the team, just having the problem we're gonna solve, this is the pain point, yada yada yada. So like in your mind, since like you have seen like thousands of pitches, like what would you say would be your way to approach investors in general? Like, a lot of people are doing the numbers game, so like just go on like NFX, like, and then find you know the 2000 consumer tag investor and then pitch their, I don't know, chat gpt for food or something. So like how
Yeah.
would you kind of like go about pitching in general, and then how long do you think it kind of takes, since you're the pitching expert since for the last 10 years?
I think it takes a few months, even in the
Mhm,
best run processes, and it takes at least 2 weeks
mhm,
of very actively pitching,
mhm,
and maybe three or four. But the best founders treat it like a process with
mhm,
discrete steps. So an example of some of those steps in the process is I really feel like you should choose your first pitch date way ahead of
mhm,
time. So if you're thinking of raising in the fall, which is a common time, and founders we work with within the Rackhouse portfolio are lining up to sort of start fundraising in, say, September 3rd, right after Labor
mhm,
Day. That's great. Move back 6 weeks and say you have to start building your story and your pitch
mhm,
deck and getting your champions ready and honing your pitch
mhm,
6 weeks before that. So mid-July. So starting to think about that. First step is really thinking through your narrative, which is what you were alluding to. Like a loaf of bread is not a miscellaneous collection of ingredients. It's like very
mhm,
carefully constructed in steps, and anybody
mhm,
who's a baker will know that you can't really get those steps wrong or the quantities wrong.
mhm,
But um, so thinking through your narrative, that's a messy process. I actually like to do that in low definition, not high definition.
mhm,
So even just 12 bullet points on a blank
mhm,
page on sort of what the logical progression of arguments, why it's an exciting opportunity works really well. Or, do your first pitch deck exercises in Comic Sans, like some horrendously ugly font that where the strength of the message has to come through. It's not sort of like the beautiful pixels. Then you're moving towards pulling a deck together. One of the things that I believe strongly that people don't really talk about is I don't think founders should think about their fundraising deck as a whole series of 12 slides or 15 slides in a row. I think that's far too complex with like too many interrelated variables between different sections and slides. What I really argue about is worry about the like the narrative sub arcs, the 3 slide sections that talk about sort of problem and solution, or progress is another very common one where that'll take 2, 3, 4 slides in a row. You're talking about traction. You have another slide on some more traction things, and you're talking about pipeline and sales, et cetera, et cetera. If you worry about these sub arcs, like 2, 3, 4, 5 slides in a
mhm.
row themselves without worrying about how they all fit together, what comes out is you end up having a really strong story in the end, no matter which order they go in, because each one of these sort of sections or acts in that play are really compelling. You're
Wait,
right. Oh, so go ahead.
oh, sorry. I have a question, since like right now everyone's using ChatGPT to like put stuff together. Like obviously, I think like ChatGPT will suggest you to do like these different slides. Like how would you use AI in this case to like pitch your company, and then what kind of stuff do you like would you not use AI to do?
This is a great question. I have not completely figured it out, but like a good venture capitalist, I have strong opinions before I've completely figured it
Mhm,
out. I think chat-based AI is really, really helpful and important at a couple different phases. It can be really helpful at ideation. So what are some basic structures or points of emphasis or arcs that that you can develop? In that stage, you have to be really, really careful that you're not forgetting or neglecting the important points that come out of your own brain and your conviction. Because if you just pitching, like if you just pitch a chat GPT deck, it's going to sound kind of like a lot of different things. It's not going to be differentiated. It tends to be really good for things that you miss. So, you know, are there gaps in the story that make sense? It can be pretty good for dialing up definition. If you have sort of a skeleton that is really compelling, fleshing out those points below, it can be helpful for that. And what was the last thing? Yeah, basically filling out the gaps and the stories. Oh yeah, the other thing that I've seen it really be helpful, even for us, you know, we're not fundraising, but we will be, and so we think about it pretty much constantly, is the talking points that support each of your main narrative points. So like, what are the talking points and examples below that? And these things work better if you give the LLM a lot of context. So you can feed it a bunch of context about your company. But I think the biggest thing is like, it is like, you know, a partially interested, it's like a secondary actor in this brainstorming process. You still need to own your story. You need to have conviction around the strong points. You can't let the AI drive it. It's just a helping hand at this point.
For sure. I wonder, so like, since like I was also listening to your other podcast that basically you were writing down on like, you know, don't pitch your like most ideal investors first. Like, you know, I guess like how, first of all, like a lot of people pitch like, you know, hundreds of investors who got like the round done. So like, I wonder, how would you suggest the founders to um got, I guess, like get the 100 investor to pitch from. So like a lot of people are saying warm introduction, but you know, like if you live in Ohio, like you don't have 5, you know, investor friends, like how would you kind of like network your way in? And for the online material, so like for example NFX or like somewhere that like, you know, a lot of people on LinkedIn would do like the lead gen, so basically gave you like an Excel sheet of like 200 investor and blah blah. I've seen people getting internships from DMing every investor before, but I don't know like if that's the best approach since everyone's getting the same list. Like how would you kind of approach to pitch investor and the source investor to make sure that they actually invest in your sector and your stage?
Yeah, that's a great question. You got to start 6 weeks ahead if you already have some network, or if you don't, you've got to start if you know you're going to need to fundraise maybe even multiple times for your company, start investing in that pretty early on. Ohio is a great example. One of the big early investments that I made at my previous firm, Ridge, was in Loop Returns, which is Columbus based. So I've flown many times to Ohio and I really like visiting. But it's true, and actually they have a pretty interesting emerging ecosystem in Columbus, but you're right, you're a little farther from New York or Silicon Valley or London or something like that. I think if you know that you might be putting your company on venture track, you really want to start building links with folks in larger ecosystems a year out at least. And so just find a reason to be in San Francisco every quarter for 4 days and figure out what the affinity connections are, like whether you are at Ohio State and you hit up Ohio State people, or people who sort of traveled from that state and now live in the Bay Area. There's tons. I'm a Canadian. There's, I think, 800,000 Canadians in the Bay Area, some stupid number. I might be off by a little bit, but a huge number. So you can always find people from wherever you come from. So I would start to do that work ahead of time, and that's pretty easy. It takes work, but startups and venture and tech, I think, is among the easiest industries to build a network with people who are really accomplished, because at least in the larger ecosystem, they're really open to new conversations. You can't and you shouldn't dismiss anybody because they're early in their career or something like that. Versus something like law or investment banking, it's much harder to sort of build those networks really quickly. When you're talking about, but you asked a great question, Grace, about, you know, how you build the lead list and how you think about it. So a process is a series of steps. Just treat it like a process. Your aim should be to build the lead list, like you say. I think there's a right number of companies to get on that list. It's actually not 200 or 250. Let's say you're raising a seed round. it's probably 50 or 60. And that's the right number, because then you're filtering for actual relevance versus just folks that you're going to spam. Some of them, NFX is a great tool. They've done a really nice job over there. It might have been higher signal a few years ago. The same names keep popping up at the top of different sectors right now. It's still a useful tool. I use that. Get Big Boar or steal access to PitchBook or Crunchbase or something like that from somebody who has a login, and just see who's invested in companies in your space. You also want to simultaneously be building your set of champions. And nobody ever talks about champions in a fundraising process. I think this is a really important component that we should be screaming about as an industry instead of forgetting. Champions are people that I define them as people who know you, people who want you to succeed, and people who are connected in the network in some way. So these are sometimes advisors and investors, but typically they're other founders who are a couple steps ahead. Doesn't really matter. You want to build a quick list of at least a half dozen champions who are on your side through this process, and maybe up to sort of like 10 or 12. You would be surprised how many people you have in your latent network when you activate them. So there is an exercise of sort of just like going through your contacts and then having, catch up conversations with 20 people to figure out who the right 8 or 6 that are going to be able to help you in this process. And then you go to your champions, especially if they're other founders who have raised a couple rounds, and then you spend 30. The key is forcing people onto a call and saying, all right, cool. Do you mind, like, thank you for helping. Can we just go through your fundraising CRM? Doesn't matter if they landed on your cap table. Like, who did you love pitching, even if they didn't, commit to invest? Who did you take onto your cap table that you really love working with? And so you go through NFX, you go through Googling, you go through PitchBook and CB Insights and Crunchbase and platforms like that. ChatGPT is working pretty well for this stuff, not amazingly well yet. And then the most high signal is going to be from your champions and other founders. And then you sort of batch that process over a couple of weeks, and you come up with a really high list. Then what you do with it is you have that list of 50 or 60, and you put it back to your champions and people you trust and say, like, I think my first choice investors is this set. I think my second choice investors is this set, and I think my third choice investors is this set. Do you agree? What do I have wrong? Who should I put in tier 1 for me versus tier 2? And then you go from there.
For sure. I love that. I wonder, so when, let's say after you pitch like 10 people, everybody think your idea is like terrible, like how would you kind of like refine it? And then obviously, like on our show, we have here like investors who are investor of like, I don't know, thumbtack or something, and that's like after the founder pitch like 50 to 80 people and they finally got a track, and now they're like super successful. Like how would you, I guess, like after the first 10, if let's say the first 10 or like we don't invest in this sector, this is a bit too early for us, yada yada yada, like everyone have a different reason to be like no, like how would you kind of like keep going about it or like not going about it?
Thumbtack is a fun example because we actually helped them, and I helped them when I was at AngelList back in the day.
Yeah.
Probably with the round you're referring to, or maybe an early one. I think it's about running a tight process so you can troubleshoot what the problem is, right? So the question is it a pitch quality problem? Like you're not telling the right story effectively? Is it a relevance problem? Like you're not actually meeting the right investors in the process? Or is it something else? You just don't fundamentally have enough quality investors in the pipeline. There's all these stories, and they're valid and they're correct, and they definitely happen, of founders just grinding 100+ pitches until they raise a round. That does happen, and there's a testament to the grit and determination of those people. If you have a reasonable audience, like your lead list, your hit list is populated with people who write checks, who are pretty sophisticated, etc., and are kind of like predisposed to like what you're doing, it's a reasonable match. My rough barometer is you should be converting about 1 out of 10 initial conversations into money. Lead or follow on doesn't really matter. It's kind of fuzzy, but 1 out of 10. If you're converting 1 out of 50, there's something wrong. So like continuing to brute force, it might work. The Thumbtack example, like there's a bunch of those examples, but there are also many more examples of people who kind of brute forced 150 conversations and it didn't work. And maybe that time would have been better spent doing something else to try to move the needle. So if you're less than if you're converting less than 10%, I think probably your story is not strong enough. That is very common. So then you have to go back and rebuild or hone the story. Or maybe you're meeting the wrong people. You're actually like not qualifying and disqualifying at the top of your funnel well enough.
Mhm.
This is a matching problem. Like, probably 20 or 25% of your conversations are actually likely to land. And sometimes you don't know till you get to the table. But you asked sort of a related question too. If your story is not strong enough and if you figure out, okay, my narrative isn't really as powerful as it needs to be, there is one tactic that I really like to help hone a pitch. I call it, this is a terrible name, I call it the excitement and hesitation game. I'm sure there's a better name out there. But what you do is actually you go back and you practice your pitch. And you can do this before you even go to market. But you want to have a bunch of practice pitches. I think the right number is sort of 5 to 8, something like that. You don't need to do 50, but you shouldn't do 0. And these are with people who know what they're talking about and are also friendly and are going to be candid with you. And what you ask them to do, you say like, all right, I'm going to give you my pitch. I'd like you to take a piece of paper. I'd like you to draw a line down the middle, and I'd like you to put E on one side and H on the other. And I'm going to pitch. And every time something I'm saying or something you think about makes you really excited, I want you to just jot a note down on the E side, on the excitement side. And anytime there's sort of a hesitation in your mind that you come up with or that I trigger, write that on the hesitation side. And then just do that. And then you do that with 5 or 6 people, and you collect all of the E's and the H's, and you say, what are the patterns here? What are people consistently excited about? Is it our background? Is it the market? Is there something about how we're tackling it with technology or product? And what are they hesitating about? Because those are often not voiced, but they kind of sit and infect an investor on their side quietly. And the reality is, especially at the early stages, it's kind of an emotional decision for investors when the sum of their excitement exceeds the sum of their hesitations. They invest, and when it's the opposite, they don't. But you need to like pull that out.
I wonder, so since you mentioned about the excitement, and I guess like I want to tap on like 2 little points before we move on to like Rackhouse and like all things that you guys are messing now. But one thing is about the storytelling. So I guess like what like maybe like can you just give us like one tip on like how to pull the best story out of you? Because I think like from as a founder myself, like I mean I have also worked as associate. Like at the beginning, I thought every story was like, oh my God, this is the most amazing company I've ever seen. And then like lately, I feel like every company I've seen, there's 400 other companies that are doing the same thing. Like AI SDR, like, customer service, like literally like everyone's doing some sort of that. How do you kind of like quickly um like kind of showcase your relevancy to that like the things that you're building? Because yesterday when I was like advising other people on their pitch, I'm like, I'm pretty sure there's like 4,000 other people could have just built this unlovable. Like, but I said this to the founder, but like, how do you kind of like differentiate you versus like these other people? Um, I wonder, like, since like right now we're living at AI edge, like technically everyone can do the same product whatsoever. How do you kind of like differentiate yourself, unless you're building obviously OpenAI or something? I'm sure the competition is a lot less, but how do you kind of like go for a sub domain sector, let's call it like AI agent or something, to actually tell an interesting story when you're like a recent grads or like someone with some small experience in a category?
Yeah, this is the tough question. Is a really good one. If you think it's hard for startups, think about how hard it is to differentiate for us on this side of the table when
Yeah,
we're raising our funds. Like most venture funds, unfortunately, sound the same. I think we all have to hold ourselves just highly, highly accountable for differentiation. So it's like you can almost never be too incisive and specific and differentiated. So you just keep going, and you don't think that you've ever satisfied it. And your point is great, Grace, because founders don't. Like we'll see 800 or 1,000 companies this year at Rackhouse. Like founders don't have that set to look at, so they don't know. And you see a ton too. They don't actually have the sort of sample set to say like, oh, I'm not actually that differentiated. So you just got to keep going. I think some of the tactics that can really help. I think what you're doing now may or may not be differentiated, but you can think about what you're doing later and where you're going. So like how the now connects to the later, there's a lots there. You can think about why you're doing it and what the conviction is. You can think about where your team comes from and listen, like, why are you the perfect team to tackle this problem is a really potent area to think about because they're betting on team so early. And then how you're doing it. So like those are interesting areas to mine. I think it's almost like people should figure out what works for them, but I find a couple things work for me. One, I just get out and move. Like I go for a walk and think about stuff, and then I just capture voice memos and notes. And like the most interesting high conviction stuff comes when I'm on a walk or a run. The other thing I like, I don't drink a lot these days, but I would advise people to like write drunk and edit sober is a good way to do this. So like when you've had a couple glasses of wine or a beer, you tend to be a little punchier, and that punchiness is great. So coming out and doing a lot of that is really helpful. And then the third thing that I love is, and this is one of the things that we look for in teams, which we might get to, I just love specificity. Like I love people who are really, really specific about what they're doing, but like how and why and what they know about the customer and why they built parts of the technology or product. Specificity is like a superpower. It's that way because the risk of any investor pitch is not that they're going to like you or not like you. The risk is that you're not going to get over their activation energy to invest. Like there's a pretty high bar of they have to give a shit. And then they have to like possibly get it through their firms and convince their colleagues and all these things. So it's an activation energy problem. And when you're specific and when you're opinionated, you're going to lose some people because they don't agree with you. But the people who are predisposed to agree with you are going to get over that activation energy. And that's actually the powerful thing. So just be really, really, really specific and don't be general. And then you put yourself in a smaller and smaller bucket, as you know, as you've seen, like you put yourself in a smaller bucket of competitors that look like you.
For sure. How do you write the competition page? And like, so for example, a lot of people fear of, oh, what if I list like the 5 company that's doing exactly this? Like, I'm gonna, just give them attention to. Yeah.
There's a couple different ways you can do it. I think maybe in sort of maybe like the elementary school, the high school, and then the college version. The elementary schools, you put your 2x2 matrix. It totally works. I think the art is in selecting those axes that sort of put you on the top right quadrant. Those are effective at splitting you out, but also sort of believable and powerful. And that's a bit of a process. Maybe the high school version is you're telling an analog story of another company that's come before and done this like in another sector or another previous generation or layer of technology. This is a little bit less relevant now, but we used to see this like, YouTube did this in video, we're doing this in Y. It's sort of like the Uber X for Y and the Uber for X. And that stuff was overdone at a certain point, but really effective for quite a while because people could sort of paint that journey onto what you're doing.
Yeah.
I think the college version is to really, really nail the why now story, and it's a little fuzzier, and but it shows up in so many different ways. Why is now the perfect time to start this company? Why would 3 years ago have been way too early, and 3 years from now is going to be way too late? And then, and again, just being as specific with concrete examples as possible.
For sure. I love that. I feel like this is such a great analogy of like the elementary school, high school, and college. I've never heard that, but I wonder what about like qualifying your investors, right? So like I think one of the other biggest problem like the founders have asked me before was, oh, what if like we pitch to an investor, they don't invest but gave our information to their portfolio company and then we're dead? Or like should we pitch because let's say if I'm a consumer company, there's only a few consumer investor, yeah, like and then they probably seen everything and then like if I give it to them, they probably have a portfolio company that does a adjacent similar sector. Let's say we're like a food company, we're probably gonna sell it to like the rest of the food crew, right? So like how do you think about qualifying the investor, making sure that they have capital to deploy, and then they also never invest in like something that's exactly this and then take our data to like 500 other people, or like just trying to waste our time? So for example, came in but like they're just there to like fill their own knowledge gap, that kind of stuff. So how would you kind of like qualify them?
Yeah, it's hard. You're not going to get it perfect. My wife is a repeat founder, and she's, she's not fundraising, but somebody on her cap table kept strongly suggesting that she meet with a certain investor. She finally did, and he just pumped her for information. And she's
Yeah.
sophisticated. She's done this before, so she recognized it, and she just didn't really give much up. But he even said, "Oh, I don't even really have an active fund. I just do this to stay current." And she's like, "What the hell? Like, screw you
Yeah,
for wasting my
wasting
time!"
time.
Like,
Yeah.
she was so angry. This doesn't actually happen that much. It does happen. Like, investors do pass along information. We try to be super, super tight about that. Like, we just don't,
Mhm.
like, there's a hard line, and we're really, really careful about it, because I think reputation is everything. It does happen. I think on the founder side, you sort of try to limit how much gets out. You do that with, using DocSend with logins instead of just passing on PDFs. You do it, metering out information at the right time of the process. That's all pretty normal stuff. The qualification, I mean, all right, Grace, consumer is a perfect example for this, because you're
Mhm.
right. It's so hard. I'm actually really bullish on consumer right now. It's not really
Mhm.
what we do at Rackhouse, but I think that there's an emerging set of people. I think it's going to do really well. It used to be, 25 or 30% of VC. It's
Mhm.
right now, it's about 8 or something like that. So I
Yeah.
think the natural state in the next 5 years is going to be closer to like 15 or 20%. It's going to come back. Something like that, where there are fewer target investors, you just need to do much more work on the lead gen and qualification than you would. And you
Mhm.
have to, like, not rely on, oh, I'm going to go pitch Excel, or I'm going to go pitch Greylock or Sequoia. You have to figure out who's actually active, and it's going to be pretty hidden. It's going to be like the folks at Daybreak, or it's going to be like, I won't mention names because I'm not sure how close they're, but people are spinning out of larger funds that are setting up their own
Mhm.
consumer-oriented fund. I know a couple of those people. So you're going to have to do more work. This is really where, like, going to find your champions is going to be important and helpful. And then, yeah, you really do want to find people who have invested in adjacent but not too
Mhm.
overlapping areas, because they're going to be the ones who know your space reasonably well and are predisposed to invest, but aren't investing in a competitor. And then, if you get on the platforms, if you can sort of borrow this login, you can go see who's raised a fund or something like that. You can also ask those questions up front. We've had a handful of those in pitches recently. It's like, hey, where are you in your fund deployment? Totally reasonable question. You can always cut if they're not actively investing, or if they've invested in a competitor, cut that conversation off early. You don't have to be polite. I'm Canadian. My people are too polite. Like, don't be. Just be like, hey, like, super nice to meet. Seems like you do have a competitor. So, let's just keep moving. So, but I think also, you can minimize the odds, but you can't stop them, unfortunately. And you just have to not worry too much about it. I think there's a relatively small set of cases where um, competitors actually define your success as an early stage startup. It's just not very common.
For sure. Lakshay, one of the audience, Lakshay, said, how to break into VC out of nowhere. Yo,
This is,
honestly,
yeah,
I love this question, but I
yeah.
want to hear your answer.
I've written about this, and we try not to spend all these conversations plugging stuff we've written, but this one did quite well. Is like how to break into VC, especially as a junior person, sort of like analyst, associate, principal.
Mhm.
Um, it's tough. It's sort of, 10 years ago, there was 20 people who wanted every single seat. When we were in the ZERP era, the pandemic, it was sort of, there's so many more seats, it became sort of 5 people for every seat. And now it's going back. Actually, the industry is contracting. And what we're seeing right now is a winnowing out between the people who love it and just couldn't do anything else, or would never do anything else. I'm one of those people. I would do this job for free if I had to.
Mhm.
And those who are sort of a little more touristy and did their tour, and then they're going away. So it's getting tough again right now.
Mhm.
Um, Basically, there's a handful of ways to think about this. One, think of it like a system, or probabilistically. If you ask any one venture capitalist like how they got their job, it's going to seem like a hopelessly unique situation, and it is. It's just they all seem different, and thus, like, all of our stories are unhelpful to new people coming in. But it is a probabilistic thing, which is, the quantity and quality of your second order network ties is really what influences it. So you have to be building your network. You have to be playing the part before
Mhm.
you get the job. This is the key thing. Is like, you have to. I mean, you're so good at this, right? Like, you're a perfect example. Um, and I don't know that you're aiming at this or not, but I think like, sorry, go ahead.
No, like I totally hear you. And I feel like I've done that before. So like that was like my last era from like breaking into VC. So like I interviewed a bunch of VCs for my books and then like I got a job. Like this is complete accident. I was not really like shooting for a job, but I was like just the young guy who knows like a bunch of founders. So like
Yeah,
basically I feel like you just have to be that person who like already know a bunch of founders. And then like when the VC asks you, okay, so name 3 company, and then it's like on the back of your head, and then you just like you already know them, you chat with them every day, and then you kind of like basically create like I think as a younger person, it's all about like delivering what is the newest, like what is happening, giving out the trends, and then like listing. I think it's a numbers game, like you said earlier. It's kind of like
yeah,
you like when you were at AngelList, you like name like you like see 8,000 deals. That's a crazy value add. So like basically, you just have to see 8,000 deals before you get a job in VC. I feel like,
yeah,
I mean, that's like a
and
crazy,
that's
but yeah, it's extreme. But
yeah. I mean, what you want to aim for, again, like what is sort of the accountability thing when you get to a conversation with somebody who might hire you is that's the perfect example. Is like, what are 3 companies you love? And the perfect answer is something like, here's 3 examples. The first one I loved. I've known them for 18 months. They just raised a round. They're probably beyond your firm, but it was excellent. The second one hasn't raised yet. I think you should look at them. Like, I can make that introduction. And you can even say the third one, here's one I love and I'm tracking. And maybe you don't even know them yet, but you sort of like, you have your eye on somebody and it's for very specific reasons. So answers like that show a lot of nuance. Figuring out a way. AngelList, I was very fortunate to land there and be useful to hundreds of founders. But then after AngelList, I've worked with over 1,000 founders on their fundraising, and I just started working with accelerators and being one of the people that helps them in this process, even as an equity advisor to a handful. So whatever your angle is, I think just sort of like own it, lean into it, and just go be like, play the part before you have the job.
for sure, I totally agree. And Garanish says like Brenna, you had fascinating journey from being okay. So I'm just gonna obviously the first part is how awesome you are, and then the second part is like how was your perspective on early stage investing evolved, particularly in AI infrastructure companies. Why don't we start with Rackhouse background, and then like how do you join Rackhouse, and then obviously Kevin was a past guest, love Rackhouse. Kevin was a speaker at our conference, and like I love the whole Rackhouse team. Shout out to Jen, shout out to like Claire and like everybody else. So maybe we start with like your journey to Rackhouse. What is Rackhouse investing in, and then we could go from there.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin and I had bumped into each other when I was at Greylock way back in the day. I was there, as mentioned, for 4 years, really I had a team of analysts and engineers trying to use code, product, data system research to help make Greylock a better firm, which is a tall order. It's a very, very good firm as it was. But he was also a data leader in one of their communities. And he was sort of tracking the very small tribe of people who were trying to build modern venture capital at that time. We kept in touch off and on throughout the years, and then more recently sort of got nudged back in contact through a very small number of people that we both know very, very well. So it helps to sort of like, even though Kevin and I didn't have, we weren't best friends for 15 years, we did have a small set of people that we really trust who knew both of us well. And that's how most of this happens. And when I was thinking about my next home and chatting with Jan and Kevin, what really jumped out to me about Rackhouse was it was not the largest fund I was talking with, but it was the most ambitious team I was talking with. And there was sort of like Rackhouse and what they were trying to build and what now we're trying to build. And then there was sort of like a gap, and then there was everybody else, including some firms that I really respect and think very highly of. But just the way over here, the long-term view of what we're trying to build was stark. And so, that was one of the main reasons, as well as sort of a relationship I could have with Kevin and Jan and Claire and all the other folks on the team who are awesome. Rackhouse is pre-seed and seed stage investor in applied AI companies. So we believe, like many people, that we're very early in this AI super cycle. We try to invest in the things that are more like how it gets applied or diffused into these industries. Not all dusty, unsexy industries, but that's really my background, is how you build software to make something like supply chain better for, you know, your average manager on a Wednesday afternoon somewhere in Ohio. Like, she deserves better software. But we're really trying to lead or co-lead rounds at the earliest stages, like 2 founders in a deck, in typically the less hypey areas of this hypey world is what we tend to do.
What is the least hyped area? And then also, like, I want to shout out to Calvin and Jam. Like, I feel like your team is like such a big like talent magnet. So like everybody I talk to are super impressive. And then like obviously whenever I walk into the Rackhouse office, there's some crazy people just sitting there. So I wonder, crazy in the best way. Obviously, it's like, you know, crazy hard to reach people there. So I wonder, you also mentioned about like, you know, Rackhouse has like a really huge vision. Like, what does that kind of entail? So obviously, like investing in AI is kind of like every firm, but I think like seems like data is your like bread and butter. Like, how do you kind of like leverage that into turn that into like a really huge edge for Rackhouse? Or like, what is the Rackhouse vision? Maybe if you could share with the audience too.
Yeah, maybe I'll split this into 2 sides. One, sort of like how we're thinking about opportunity, and then 2, how what we're focused on in terms of what we bring to the table and what we present. I think from the how we're thinking about opportunity, we're pretty opinionated. Definitely credit Kevin for most of this thinking. But we really haven't invested in AI infrastructure. We think it's a great way to lose money. If you're not in sort of the Anthropic and OpenAI, it's like a very small number. I also have an opinion that we're going to have another wave of AI infrastructure that is created, but is much more informed by the application layer. So we kind of have to like wait for a year, 2 years, 3 years to see what people are trying to do, and then we'll build another wave of infrastructure that really supports that versus coming out ahead. So we invest a little bit in the reasoning layer, really niche reasoning models for specific industries. An example of that is we've backed a company that does LLMs for industrial robotics around a specific, you know, way of tackling that problem. That's maybe 10% of what we do. 80% of what we do, maybe 70, 80, is application layer. So how does AI get baked in to applications that serve end users? We think we're just really, really early, until like the last person in the last industry is thoroughly adopting AI. That's a 15 or 20 year period. And then the gap there, the 20%, is we're really interested in context and memory and how those layers get developed. And it's extraordinarily fuzzy right now. But like, how do you build a layer of your technical context so that your, you know, AI engineer, like your Cursor, Windsurf, portfolio company Windsurf, like those AI coding agents are not showing up like it's the first day every day, but there's actually an institutional memory. So those are the things that we're looking at, and those tend to lend themselves to some of the less hypey areas, not always. How we show up, I think we work really hard to have a high NPS in our near network, and that's true. Like Kevin referenced me, I referenced Kevin before, and Rackhouse before I joined. And what came back was like screaming table pounding for these folks. And so we're really proud of that. And we're in the phase of sort of making sure we hold that up and we just continue to deliver disproportionate value, and sort of then increasing our presence outward. We're not trying to shout really loudly right now. We're trying to just increase the size of the army of people who feel the way you do when they come into the office.
For sure. I wonder, so like for the 70 to 80% like application layers of stuff, like, and then let's call it like the boring but valuable category of things, like what are some stuff that you feel like is like still undervalued? Because like I think a lot of investors are really paying attention to the unsexy area, let's call it, like, you know, how do you define it? And then like a lot of people call the unsexy area like the industrial revolution stuff, so like a lot of deep tech and stuff. But I guess like for Rackhouse, like what is the unsexy area? Like gave us like 5 examples of, you know, how the Ohio crew kind of like win the game basically.
Yeah, that was a good.
Like,
yeah, the Ohio. I'll do the loop returns example. Previous firm, but still close to that company. But yeah, that loop returns as a returns infrastructure for e-commerce, right? Based on the Shopify ecosystem. At this stage, they've pretty much won their sort of initial, like, how do we be the return solution on Shopify? But it wasn't obvious when we invested and when when I invested. I think they're, 20% of e-commerce goes in the other direction as returns, and there was an entire sort of forward logistics industry that had been built, and there really wasn't and still isn't much of a reverse logistics industry. So our belief was that you have to sort of have some strong opinions, maybe one layer down. Our opinions and my opinions were, one, you're going to end up with a reverse logistics industry that has the sophistication of like the big forward logistics players like Infor or Manhattan Associates or something. If you look at their websites, there's just sort of, 5 rows by 3 columns of different things that they do, and it's very, very well evolved, and we have none of that. And we're seeing it play out. There's great companies like 2 Boxes and what Kyle is building there at the warehouse layer, like trying to make it easier to get, the things that we return in the other direction. The other thing is that, it was a feature, not a bug, that the company was in Ohio. It's like you have to kind of go where some of these problems are. And even now, you have to be excited to jump on a plane and go to a different place than, Silicon Valley and Boston and New York. We're just now investing in a company that is based in Chicago. They do warehouse quality control and quantity tracking through computer vision. Like, they're based in Chicago. That's the perfect place for this company to be based. Like, do not move to the Bay Area. Travel here. Like, you need to know how AI is moving. But we love that they're based there. We love that they're customer obsessed. Frankly, we love that they're doing kind of like computer vision, which is old school, but quietly. There have been some really interesting technical advances on the model side behind CV. So it's making it easier to deliver a lot more value more cheaply than, say, 5 years ago in this area. And so that's a perfect example. Like, we love LLM-based companies and features within products, but we're also looking at other machine learning and AI areas, and we always will. Computer vision is one of those that we think is like a quiet opportunity right now.
For sure. I wonder, so like, how would you diligence a warehouse quality control company? So like, I guess just by, talking to 500 warehouses, or like, how do you typically go about it for the
You
diligence?
definitely want, you want to have some experts around, and we have a pretty deep bench of logistics and supply chain folks around Rackhouse based on both what I've invested in the past and what Kevin has invested in and built himself at Uber. So that helps. So you have 5 people that you can ping, in 20 minutes. I think you want to get close to customers, whether it's prospective customers, people who might adopt, or actual customers. So we definitely do a little bit of that. But the teams we're investing in are pretty early. So it's really a team bet and how they think about it. So there we're evaluating, do they come from the industry? I think it's really, really important that you have domain expertise right now. The reality is that all of these teams, all of these companies are moving so fast and creating so much differentiated value over the past generation of SaaS tools that they're trying to replace, that you need teams that are moving really, really fast in the right direction. So just like there's this interesting and like entertaining but vaguely annoying debate going on the internet right now. But like, do you do 996 or do you work 80 hours? And is your team like, you're flying to tiny town and you're all just going to work 7 hours a day? That's great. Like, you need to be working hard, but are you moving in the right direction? Like, are you moving towards your customer? So we hunt for people who are customer obsessed, who talk about that early in a pitch. We count slides or minutes to understand like how quickly do you talk about a customer, and then they come from the industry so that they know. I think you need to be sprinting at your customer right now when you're building an applied AI, and in the back of your head, maybe nights and weekends, you need to be thinking about like, okay, what is the second act of this company, and what's going to win in the medium to long term. And people who come from their industries, they're really good at that.
Can you give us an example of like the second act and the moving in the long term? Like, what are some examples of a particular company that actually have a second act? Because I think like most of the pre-CC startup, like they always have a grand vision, and the vision are like actually super either unrealistic or, like I just constantly hear like, oh, in the next 3 years, we're going to have like $50 million ARR. I'm like, how? So like a lot of the apps that are like, if you're just charging $12 per month, like how many users do you need to actually get there? And then people always think, oh, something will be at OpenAI level of like publicity and stuff like that. But how would you think about like the realistic side of things on like how much this company can actually grow. And obviously not every company is gonna be like a Codian slash Windsurf and stuff, but like,
Yeah.
how do you kind of first of all like find these companies, and second of all like vet these companies on the second ad medium long term goal?
It helps to have a partner who's a data and AI expert, which is
Yeah.
which is within Kevin, which is really rare in our industry to have sort of a GP who comes from the industry and has done this at scale, for a decacorn.
Mhm.
It varies. It varies across all different companies. Look very different. There's a very good example in the Rackhouse portfolio though that is very close to us. A company called Nash. What Nash does is provides last mile infrastructure, last same day delivery infrastructure
Mhm.
for customers like Walmart and 7-Eleven. So basically, when you buy something from Walmart, they are helping Walmart understand what are the delivery options, like as early as checkout.
Mhm.
What should we push, Grace or Brendan to, and then what are the sort of the performance and cost implications of using different same day delivery providers.
Mhm.
This is a problem because same day delivery wasn't really a widely adopted thing 10 years ago.
Mhm.
It's sort of come to be expected by consumers in the last handful of years, certainly through the pandemic.
Mhm.
And so all of a sudden, like there's this complexity that needs to be managed, which
Mhm.
is perfect for Kevin. He was like at Uber, he's like, how do I solve rush hour with math? And
Mhm.
Nash is like, how do we solve delivery with math? So that was the first act, is like, how do they build an infrastructure layer for a Walmart or somebody like that that helps them understand all of
Mhm.
their options and choose the right delivery for the right good for the right customer at the right time. The second act is like building an agentic layer on top of that to build more value, which is funny because like most companies are doing that in reverse. They're saying we're building an agent layer, we're tapping to it in existing systems like your ERP or your WMS or any 3-letter acronym you can think of. We live in 3-letter
Mhm.
acronyms in boring areas. But Nash is doing it in the other direction. They say like we have this phenomenal data set. Now, how do we build like additional capabilities for our customers on top of that? That is really their second act. They didn't talk about it for the first few years, and now they're starting to do it and talk about it and have their early customers like really committing to that too. So beautiful example of a second act.
For sure. I wonder, so like when you're I guess like when you're doing the industry mapping for a Nash to exist, like I guess like how many companies that like I guess like what are something that you would compare your company with, and then what are something that you feel like it just doesn't matter? Because I think from my experience of like interacting with a lot of investors and founders, I think a lot of people are paying attention to like I think in Silicon Valley, everybody pay attention to the tech, but like not a lot of people paying attention to like how the customer reacts to certain things. But on the other hand, when you're not in Silicon Valley, a lot of people paying attention in New York, a lot of people paying attention to how do I get the numbers right? So like here's our prediction, like yada yada yada. I guess
Yeah.
like what like when you are creating a second F for your own company, what are some stuff that you should pay attention to? And as an investor, like how do you vet if this is like actually gonna be like real from chatting with other companies?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll answer it from a sort of initial investment point of view. I think there's a couple examples. One I love, which happened before my time at Rackhouse, but
Mhm.
we invested in Fathom, one of the note takers.
Mhm.
And what, when
Oh, I was
Kevin
gonna
led
ask
that,
you that. Yeah. Sorry, but
yeah,
let's keep going, sorry.
yeah, no, I mean, that's a great example because there were probably 50 note takers when Kevin invested
Mhm.
in Fathom.
Mhm.
But what he saw a very specific thing that came out of his expertise, which was as I understand it, a data loop baked into their product that was going to allow their intelligence to get smarter at a faster rate than a lot of their
Mhm.
competitors. And he was right. Fathom is growing extraordinarily quickly, and I would say has gone from like a 50-horse race to probably a 2-horse race right now.
Mhm.
And what we use Fathom exhaustively, we would even if we weren't investors. It's so good. Like the intelligence in Fathom is so good, and it's getting better. So Kevin
Mhm.
saw that specific thing, and he was right. So part of it is like, are you seeing a specific thing and do you have conviction in it? I would say more broadly, when we're thinking about it or evaluating it, is there a logical story that I believe and is pressure tested about this company? So
Mhm.
another example is, I mentioned the computer vision and warehouse example that we're just in the process of closing now. We had like, for most of that process, we were thinking, we think we've seen a bunch of companies like this. We think this is not a new thing. Why is this
Mhm.
different? And why is it early but working?
Mhm.
And what we came down to is most people are solving this in dumb ways. I don't know, maybe that's a bit pejorative, but they're trying to build shiny objects. They're trying to bring hardware into that environment. They're trying to build an entire platform out of the gate, when what that customer responds to is just like a simple solution for a very simple but important use case, and it's not fancy, and you make their lives as easy as humanly possible. Solve that initial use case, and then you earn the right to solve the next 4 use cases in a warehouse. So we believe that. And when we hone that messy set of seeming competitors down with that criteria, it's like there weren't actually that many that were doing it. And then we just believed, okay, we think this is a plausible narrative, like this is the right way to tackle that. And we have a threshold of like how convinced we have to be to write a check. And in that case, we hit that threshold.
Yeah. So for Fathom, you mentioned about like the data make it smarter. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because I do feel like that was in my research. I feel like that's one of the most competitive area, and obviously they just raised like $17 million for Series A. Like a lot of like there's note taker everywhere these days. Like I'm just curious. Like how do you kind of like differentiate a product over like the hundreds of like note taking apps?
Yeah, I mean, that it's a deeper question for Kevin. He'd answer this 10x better than I would. I think he just saw how they were capturing data and using it to enrich their intelligence, that the other note takers weren't. But you also see that showing up in how Fathom is thinking about their product, right? They are thinking about it not only sort of increasing the quality of their intelligence, but also increasingly allowing users to build more complex coaching and prompting for the solution within Fathom. So we do that a lot within Rackhouse. Like we want to train it to give us output in certain ways. They also make it pretty easy, and we do this all over the place, to automate out of Fathom. So you can see like their identity is different than like a Granola, which I think is more product centric, sort of like end user, single person product centric. They just like they are there for the power users.
For sure. I wonder, so I want to be mindful of the time. Maybe we do one real question and then like a quick 1 minute fire run. One real question is like, I think like, in your opinion, like what makes a boring enterprise problem a compelling opportunity for a startup? You mentioned a lot about like, logistics or like the, I guess like the making like basically making like a traditional industry hot, but like why are some industry are easier to disrupt than others? And how do you kind of like pick the opportunity that's actually, though it's a boring enterprise problem, but it's like, actually having a really big market to disrupt?
Yeah, some of them are obvious. I've been obsessing over ERPs for 3 or 4 years. I think people like NetSuite deserves a bunch of competitors, and made one investment, would like to make many more actually in that area. That one's pretty easy. Like 50 billion is a year spent on ERP software, and 2 to 8x that is spent on services. So if you think that applied AI is going to eat some of those services, that's just like a massive market. That frankly, when I started really thinking about it 2, 3, 4 years ago, not many people were. And I didn't understand why. And it's like, okay, because it's very hard to tackle. It's very hard to dislodge the incumbents. But then you sort of like keep digging, keep pushing, keep asking basic questions of smart people until you believe something and have conviction around it that most of the world doesn't. And now we're seeing like the first small set of companies come out and really challenge. And I think we're going to have another wave. But I think it's tricky right now because, I believe that, we need to be investing and backing companies that are pointed at very large prizes. But in the past, the concept of TAM was well understood. In the SaaS era, like you could describe TAM kind of to the decimal place. And most of these TAMs were very, very well known, and they had a bunch of companies and very difficult incumbents. I think the concept of TAM is less important and maybe more fuzzy right now than I've ever seen since I joined AngelList 14 years ago. So I think we need to hold ourselves accountable to building and backing companies that are pointed at large things, but then like dropping down 1 or 2 levels and having a different view that isn't necessarily like Gartner counting up that number on why this becomes big. And again, like Kevin joined a taxi company, as the 21st employee. Like that was a huge thing. You had to look at it differently than, there's an existing TAM for, mobile ordered taxis.
For sure. Okay, so I want to end with a quick one, if Farah. What's your favorite book?
Oh, I'm kind of into these like business scandal books. Like I went through the WeWork book, which was great. I went through the the SBF book, which was great, and now I'm reading the Enron book, which is great. But deep cut, I think my favorite book when I was growing up was always The Count of Monte Cristo by Dumas. It was
Mm.
like such a fantastical story. I always an evocative story. I read that multiple times, and I don't have a long attention span, so that says a lot.
Yeah, love that. Who would you invite to your dinner party?
I've got my people. I don't know. Like I wouldn't, I wouldn't fit my partners. I one of the things that is a luxury in a large ecosystem in my job is you get to do business with people that you really enjoy spending time with. Boring answer, but I would invite a lot of my past colleagues and partners and coworkers and current ones.
Love. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Hmm. Probably other Naval or John Lilly. We talked about Naval, so I'll talk about John. John was the one who kind of brought me into Greylock
Mhm.
and like gave me a seat there and helped me gave me space to start thinking about how to mess with a great venture firm from the inside.
Where can we find you outside of work?
On hills and mountains and oceans. I mean,
What?
we're an outdoors company, family rather, and we're typically on bikes or surfboards or skis, and we love it.
Love. I love that. Like you can find it anywhere outside of like just like
Yeah,
outside in the nature. Well, Brendan, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was such a fun conversation.
Grace, I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks so much.
Let me quickly answer